Good morning again, everybody.
Good morning.
Early in the book of Genesis, which is the Holy Scriptures of Jewish individuals and Christian individuals, we have the first story is how God creates all of the things of the world day by day, including man and woman in God's own likeness. Genesis says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the sixth day God finished his works which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his works which he had made. So God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all his works which God created and made." And then this day of sanctity, this day of rest, has become known as the Sabbath. And many of us are familiar of it within the Jewish tradition as often a day where individuals unplug from the everyday world and don't do business work or don't do the laundry or mess with technology. And of course, many Christians celebrate the Sabbath as well, and this idea of church on Sundays comes within the idea of the Sabbath too. But I want to talk today about the idea that this idea of the Sabbath is the key to connecting with the Spirit, the key to developing an inner life, the key to real and sincere connection with ourselves and with those around us. The Sabbath is truly a holy day or a holiday, not in the sense of a lot of consumerism and traffic, but in that sense of really honoring and experiencing a sense of what is most sacred in life around us. Because there's something really profound, I don't know about you, but for me, that happens when I'm able to move my clock from tick-tock working time all the time to a way of more of a sacred time, a primordial time, where I can move the rhythm of my heartbeat from the anxiety having to do with my to-do list to the rhythms of the ocean nearby, or to being in a lovely grove of trees, or wherever it might be, to take my consciousness and disconnect it from the busyness of everyday life, to have an experience of what it means to really just be alive. Helps me remember that what's most important isn't my business work or isn't my to-do list, but it's the things I really value most, being alive itself, my family, just being in an awareness that life is a rich and holy experience. Wayne Mueller, in our book of the month, Sabbath, points out to the importance of resting and even the creativity of resting. He says, God creates the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day God rests. But a closer reading of Genesis reveals that the Sabbath was not simply a day off. It says, on the seventh day God finished God's work. How can this be? Wasn't the seventh day when God, exhausted, took time off and rested, satisfied with the laborious work of creation? The ancient rabbis teach that on the seventh day God created manuah, tranquility, serenity, peace, and repose, rest, and the deepest possible sense of fertile, healing stillness, until the Sabbath creation was unfinished. Only after the birth of manuah, only with the tranquility and rest, was the circle of creation made full and complete. And isn't this a novel idea, that we can create peace in our own lives, that we can create love in our own lives, and that perhaps it's just as important as getting to work or doing the laundry. Mueller shares an experience of almost dying from an incredibly intense infection due to pneumonia, even though he had a little slogan on his desk that said, "Life is like the breath. It's just a matter of the right give and take. You've got to do the same thing." But he didn't listen, he shares with us. And he found himself almost dying because he had given himself so much to the busyness of his everyday life. He tells us we meet dozens of people have so many conversations. We do not feel how much energy we spend on each activity because we imagine we will always have more energy at our disposal. Does this sound like anybody here? This one little conversation, this one extra phone call, this one quick meeting, what can it cost? But it does cost. It drains yet another drop of our life. Then at the end of days, weeks, months, years, we collapse. We burn out and we cannot see where it happened. It happened in 1,000 unconscious events, tasks and responsibilities that seemed easy and harmless on the surface, but that each one after the other used a small portion of our precious life. So I don't want to ask you the question today, are you overworked or are you close to burnout? Because if you're like me, I get really stressed about being stressed. I might get burned out if I think about getting burned out. So I want to ask the question in a different way, which is to say, are you taking time to create peace in your life? Are you taking time to create a clarity of mind or of being in your life? Are you taking intentional time to create restfulness in your life? Because the message of the story in the book of Genesis for us is that God indeed creates man and woman in God's own likeness. And it's sometimes not until we get to that point of rest that we can really complete our work, that we can really celebrate our work, that we can really allow it to go forth. I remember a particular Saturday evening where I had a case of minister's block. I was really struggling with what to say on Sunday. And I had some notes there, but I just wasn't feeling it. And it could be pressure. If you ever want to be a writer, be a minister, because you've got to get up and be complete with what it is that you want to say every Sunday morning. But I got really frustrated, so I just let it go, and I just put on a movie. This was several years ago. I think it was the movie The Boxer with Mark Wahlberg. And so it was funny and entertaining and had action, and it was a good 2-hour movie. It was a good break. And when it was done, I remember just walking outside and looking up at the sky to see whatever stars I could. And it was funny because the whole talk was there. Everything that I wanted to say was as if it was brought to me as a present, just unwrapped. And so it was a reminder to me that hard work is half of the creative process in our lives. The other half is letting go. Because when we are able to let go of the busyness and resettle ourselves in our own nature, in our own rhythm of being, we can often allow our wisdom, our intelligence, our creativity to begin working for us in a more profound way. I'm not suggesting today that we all take a Sabbath day. The reason I'm not suggesting that is because I'm unable to do it myself, and that would be not only hypocritical, but a little asinine too, to tell you that you should do that. Because I have trouble finding a whole day that I can just put into restfulness. So I really respect those of you who can. But as Mueller tells us, it's not about finding a Sabbath day, it's about creating Sabbath time. Sabbath time, he tells us, may also be a Sabbath afternoon, a Sabbath hour, a Sabbath walk. Indeed, anything that preserves a visceral experience of life, giving nourishment and rest. I like something that Maria Montessori, the well-known person in education, called it. She called it making silence. That's important in our lives to take time to make silence. And that's powerful to me because I love the metaphor of silence, because in our exterior lives there's really no such thing, is there? I remember hearing about the great composer John Cage, who passed away not that long ago, and he wanted an experience of silence, so much so that he had a soundproof room made like a rubber room, and he sat down to finally hear the sound of silence. Hello, darkness, my good friend. Now that's our silence. But to hear silence, and do you know what he heard? His heartbeat is what he heard. And so he realized in that moment that as long as he was breathing and alive, that silence was something he would never really hear. And it speaks to the idea that the quiet or the silence is really a metaphor for creating an inner life, for moving inward, for having an inner self. And I really do think that one of the spiritual crises we face in our everyday life, the people we run into all the time, young people and older people, as they have repressed the inner life so much so that they feel completely attached and defined by the exterior, by how someone else defines them or how the eyes of the world define them, that they have little sense of who am I. And we only do this when we begin to use that key of creating silence, creating stillness, the metaphor of what it means to be and become within ourselves. Montessori says, silence often brings us the knowledge which we had not fully realized that we possess within ourselves an interior life. The child, by means of silence, sometimes becomes aware of this for the first time. So maybe some of us need to go back to the basics of being childlike again, to remember an inner life, to remember that we're souls, to remember that we are a consciousness and that we are a creative power in our life beyond how else the world may define us and all that we're supposed to get done and be. Another reason why I like exploring Sabbath time this month and just the topic of self-care is I think there's something really valuable when we look at religious practices in a newfound way. You know, something that's often true in the Church of Religious Science, spiritual living, whatever we call ourselves this particular month or year, is that something I really like about the church is that sometimes people feel the need in their youth to walk away from the religion of their upbringing because they find it to be discriminatory or exclusive or just not to work for them because they're rebellious. So our church is often filled with spiritual refugees or spiritual rebels, as you can tell, you know, if you look around. But the good part about it, though, is that we recognize that it's not about getting away from the religion of our upbringing, but it's about finding what's really valuable in it and reasserting it and practicing it in a newfound and profound way. I mean, that's the great thing that I love about our movement, but we're not against anything or anybody, that we're about being for the best of what's out there. So take what works in your religion and don't take anything else. Something that really made me want to talk about Sabbath this month was a great article, one of the last pieces written by Oliver Sacks, who was a great neurologist who wrote the book Awakenings that became a famous film, and just a real important doctor in modern human history. And he wrote an article in the New York Times just a week and a half or so before he died of cancer called Sabbath. He shares about his Orthodox Jewish upbringing and Jewish community. He shares, I chanted my bar mitzvah portion in 1946 to a relatively full synagogue, including several dozen of my relatives, but this for me was the end of formal Jewish practice. I did not embrace the ritual duties of a Jewish adult, praying every day, putting on tefillin before prayer each weekday morning, and I gradually became more indifferent to the beliefs and habits of my parents, though there was no particular point of rupture until I was 18. It was then that my father, inquiring into my sexual feelings, compelled me to admit that I liked boys. This is in 1946, remember. I haven't done anything, I said. It's just a feeling, but don't tell Mom, she won't be able to take it. He did tell her, and the next morning she came down with a look of horror on her face, and she shrieked at me, "You are an abomination. I wish you had never been born." She was no doubt thinking of the verse in Leviticus that read, "If a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death, their blood shall be upon them." He goes on, the matter was never mentioned again, but her harsh words made me hate religion's capacity for bigotry and cruelty. And so on this man's path, brought him into the path of medicine. He helped countless numbers of people, wrote such important doctrines almost on medicine, and continues to inspire people today. And he shares, while having a detachment from religion, meeting people who celebrated this thing called Sabbath and gaining immense respect for them. People, men he speaks of in particular in his life, who would practice the Sabbath and have all of their busy work done, but also have time for their families, also have time for a sense of self because they practice this holiday. Robert John, the famous economist, said to Sacks one day, "The observance of the Sabbath is extremely beautiful and is impossible without being religious. It is not even a question of improving society. It is about improving one's own quality of life." Later in his life, Sachs was able to return to his Orthodox Jewish community. He was able to return with his partner at the time and feel incredibly accepted and loved by his community. His closing words to us are, "The peace of the Sabbath of a stopped world, a time outside time, was palpable, infused everything, and I found myself drenched with a wistfulness, something akin to nostalgia, wondering what if A and B and C had been different? What sort of person might I have been? What sort of a life might I have lived? And now, weak, short of breath, my once firm muscles melted away by cancer, I find my thoughts increasingly, not on the supernatural or spiritual, but on what is meant by living a good and worthwhile life, achieving a sense of peace within oneself. I find my thoughts drifting to the Sabbath, the day of rest, the seventh day of the week, and perhaps the seventh day of one's life as well, when one can feel that one's work is done and one may, in good conscience, rest." What a profound goal for our lives, to be able to rest and be glad in what we have created for ourselves, to be able to let go in order to complete that process of where we're at in a relationship or in a trial or in a creative process. To reach that Sabbath point is to meet both an end point and a beginning point for what's next in our life. It's to truly honor a greater transition going on. And it gives us the gift, I think, in Sachs' story to get back to the basics of spirituality in our lives. This is why I think the Pope has resonated in such a great way. He's new, but he's not saying anything new. He's getting back to the basics of his teaching. And the basics, we believe here, all spiritual traditions are generally the same. Inspire us to a greater way of being in love and treating each other with respect and kindness. How do we create Sabbath time in our lives? Sachs gives us a couple of options, simple but powerful ones. Light a candle, he says. Find a private area, light a candle, just look at it for a while. You may feel silly at first, but then you'll recall, your spirit will come forward. Take a break, even for an hour, from your phone, from the TV, from something that's busy, and just take a walk, or read a book, or do something that honors your time to relax, and you'll be amazed at the sense of soul that comes forward. If you're like me and your phone seems like an extension of your body, I know it's right over there right now, then set an alarm on it. You know, he talks about Thich Nhat Hanh within his retreat centers ringing every once in a while a mindfulness bowl. And when the mindfulness bowl hits, everyone who's doing their work stops, takes 3 deep breaths, and then continues what they're doing. But those breaths in that moment can mean a little bit of everything. I've shared with many of you in some ways that the biggest spiritual challenge in my life is to be able to experience the good of my life while it is taking place. It's always a challenge to be present to what is often so beautiful or so wonderful, and to feel like I can really appreciate it, truly live in gratitude without any fear of time slipping away. And I think it's Sabbath time that really is the key to getting to experience life in that way. You know, Jesus famously says, "Who of you by worry can add a minute to his life?" But I think in a sense that perhaps by adding a little bit of peace, maybe we can add some time to our lives. That by adding a sense of appreciation, we can add some time to our lives. Maybe not TikTok seconds or minutes, but in the thickness of it, in the richness of it, and truly being able to experience time as it is fully. We begin to touch on that which is most primordial and real about the sacred in life, and hopefully can practice it in a newfound and creative way. So I thank you for your time, everyone, this morning. It's so great to see all of you.